Apple's only got 2 years to switch over the entire Mac lineup to their own custom Apple Silicon, and there's a basic chain of events that we can take from leakers and analysts about how this transition is going to go that I thought I could break down in today's video so that a year from now you can come back and talk about how incredibly wrong I was. Sound good? Let's begin. Alright, so we're getting a few conflicting reports from both Sonny Dixon, which... and Ming-Chi Kuo. Both of them are alluding to the idea that Apple is going to be introducing some type of Apple Silicon branded MacBook before the end of this year. We're hearing from a few of them that this could involve 2 separate machines, but Sonny, whose record is kind of questionable right now, is kind of giving us a different idea. But since Kuo has a pretty solid track record, we'll start with his. But he's suggesting that both a 13-inch MacBook Air as well as a 13-inch MacBook Pro could launch in around Q3 or Q4 of this year with Apple Silicon, likely a brand new CPU, so it's not going to be recycled from the iPad Pro, it's not going to be the A12Z chip or anything like that. It could be a whole new brand, you know, not even an A series of silicon, but of course running macOS Big Sur, and we'll likely see those great performance gains. And Sonny is saying that Apple is actually planning on discontinuing the MacBook Air and not having it around anymore because, and in my opinion, while his track record is questionable, I think it makes a little bit of sense, they want to start combining basically the 13-inch MacBook Air and 13-inch MacBook Pro, because when you're using your own Apple Silicon, there's very little differences between those two machines. If it's true that Apple CPUs are way more power efficient and have great performance, then yeah, you don't really need that many fans. You can make a much more thin and compact laptop without having to compromise much on performance. So if it's true that Apple's making these new CPUs for their machines, why bother having 2 separate 13-inch laptops if the internals are going to be the same? So I could kind of get on board with that idea. Maybe by the end of this year, it'll be branded as the new MacBook, you know, no Air or anything, just regular MacBook, perhaps with like a 14-inch display with real slim bezels. And yeah, you get the portability of the MacBook Air and the practicality and performance of the MacBook Pro in one machine, which I think would be really popular. No clue what the starting price of that thing would be. My guess is around $1,300. We'll see. But after that, Quo did talk about upcoming MacBooks that we should expect in 2021, which is when we should expect the Apple Silicon to be put into the larger 16-inch MacBook Pro. And he's saying that next year we'll actually start seeing the mini LED displays adopted, which for those who don't know, basically means all the benefits of an OLED display without the drawbacks like burn-in, except on, you know, a MacBook display panel. So if you like OLED screens and you like contrast ratio and dynamic range and that kind of thing, you should expect those to come out in Q2 or Q3 of 2021. And of course, then all the MacBooks available will be Apple Silicon branded. So it's only really going to take a year for their mobile Macs to be capable of all running Apple Silicon. But Quo has also talked about, of course, the iMac redesign, which I'm so pumped for, getting Apple Silicon internals by around Q1 or Q2 of next year. So it's still unsure when that updated design is being revealed / launched, but based on what we're hearing so far, it sounds like we should be even seeing the iMac lineup updated with Apple Silicon within the year, which I think is really ambitious and fast. The real question when it comes to the adoption of Apple Silicon, though, is will Apple still have the same configurations and tech spec options that we currently have with MacBooks, or will Apple decide to make the laptops a lot more like the iPad? You guys know how the iPad Pro has 2 separate sizes, but performance on the 2 is basically the same. I mean, you get the same cameras, the practically same displays, the only difference is the size, but you get the same internal A12Z chip, you get the same battery life, and maybe Apple wants, for simplification purposes, to bring that to the MacBook as well. So if it's possible that Apple is making these super high performance CPUs and GPUs that don't even need fans and don't need much cooling, could we end up seeing in 2021 like 2 different sized MacBooks that basically have the same performance, and the only reason to pay extra was literally just the extra size? It's possible. You know, leakers aren't telling us too much about what they're planning for the internals of MacBooks in the future, but a small part of me says that Apple knows the Mac user base likes paying extra for different specifications and having different options, and they know that's where kind of the Mac audience comes from. So I really wouldn't be shocked if they decided to still have that differentiating feature set where, yeah, the new ultralight compact 14-inch MacBook Pro, that doesn't have any fans, it has silent operation, but if you decide to wait for the 16-inch MacBook Pro, it still has Apple Silicon, but it still has fans that can keep it cool, so it can run at higher clock speeds than the smaller laptop. It could have more dedicated GPU hardware, though I don't think it'll be AMD, it'll be something Apple's cooking up, and maybe they'll still provide some performance gains if you want to end up going with the larger machine. I'm not sure exactly, but that's just just how I personally think it's gonna go. And yes, I do believe they will still let you choose different RAM and storage options. You know, the iPad Pro does have storage configurations, but they don't really give you a choice on RAM. You're just kind of stuck with 6 gigs of RAM on the iPad Pro or less on the cheaper iPads. I think because Apple knows how diverse and all over the place the Mac user base is, they'll probably still keep around the option. If you want 8 gigs of RAM or you want 32 gigs of RAM or 1.5 terabytes of RAM, yeah, all the options will probably be there. Ironically, despite the Mac Mini developer kit being shipped out with the A12Z chip, we haven't really heard much about a consumer grade Mac Mini with Apple Silicon. So part of me wonders if maybe that's going to be one of the last things to switch over to Apple Silicon. And I do mean one of, because I can say with almost complete certainty that the very last Mac to get Apple Silicon inside it is the Mac Pro. It already feels like Apple wasn't quite communicating with the Mac teams internally because, you know, the Mac Pro team was like, we want to make this real customizable, modular, you know, PC, except it's running Mac OS type thing. Over-engineer the entire design so it's super expensive, you know, $700 wheels and all that. But by the time they launched it, they just realized, oh crap, Apple's about to move to Apple Silicon now. So this new design we made for thermals and Intel processors might all be dated in just a couple years. Not to say that if you bought a Mac Pro, you won't be getting software updates. I'm still convinced anyone who paid, you know, that insane amount of money for the giant cheese grater, you're probably still gonna get 7 years of software support. But I'm really unsure if Apple's gonna be able to switch out Intel processors and switch out those Radeon GPUs and just start putting their own stuff in there and not have to change the design at all. I mean, they could leave the design the same, but if they're moving towards ARM and towards this more power efficient architecture that's supposed to run a lot cooler, then do you need to keep around giant cheese grater design? And will the modules work as well as they did on the Intel based Mac Pro? I'm not sure. And honestly, they could take it in a whole new direction. Maybe the Mac Mini and Mac Pro will just become some new, you know, Apple Silicon box that they can call just, you know, the basic Mac for some reason. It'll be super customizable, but, you know, not come with a monitor or anything. I just don't know. But because leakers and analysts aren't saying much about it, and the Mac Pro feels like it was just refreshed, and it does not get refreshed that much, then that's what makes me think, yeah, Mac Pro and Mac Mini, they're going to be the very, very last that Apple pushes to the very last minute of the 2-year mark of how long it'll take for them to switch over to Apple Silicon. But I'm very curious to see if they're still going to allow, you know, on the new iMacs that are going to be redesigned, will they let you choose like different branded CPUs? Like, will you get the A14 option, and for an extra $300 can you get the A14X, and for another $500 get the A14Z? Maybe. It doesn't feel like Apple has ever been like this obsessive with different CPUs. Usually when a new iPad comes out, it's like, yep, all the new iPads have this CPU, or when new iPhones come out, it's just like, yeah, A13 chip, it's in the iPhone 11, 11 Pro, 11 Pro Max, everything gets the A13 chip. Even the iPhone SE, yes, the $400 one, you get the A13 chip. For the sake of simplicity, that's how Apple has liked to do it with iPhones, but I get that people buy Macs a bit more for tech specs than they do just screen size. So there's so many different ways they can handle it, but the one thing I'm fairly certain on is that Apple's going to prioritize the MacBooks first for Apple Silicon, because I think that's where the ARM architecture will shine best. Thin and light power efficient devices so that you can get a whole lot of processing power in still a really compact design. And the iMac design is long overdue. It's incredibly dated specs internally, so switching the iMac over to this drastic new screen size and iPad Pro design language, at the same time switching it over to Apple Silicon, just makes perfect sense to me. I don't know why they wouldn't. And then maybe not long after that, that's when they start adopting the mini LED displays in the MacBooks. But yeah, I would guess the Mac Pro is going to get Apple Silicon maybe like summer of 2022, maybe even later. But I'm very curious to hear your guys' predictions on when you think the rollout is going to take place and what devices are going to be prioritized first. Feel free to hit me up over on Twitter, join my Discord, we can chat pointlessly over there. This is your Apple Sheep here. I'll see you in the next one.